Hello, I'm Marilyn Hemingway, and welcome to A Gathering Place. I said, I'm stepping back because we have young voices who want to be heard and they're moving on something.
Branding is really important to you and your business.
Even a basic type of technology, you'll learn it all.
And people are
Good question. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to A Gathering Place. My name is Marilyn Hemingway, and I'm your host today, and we have a wonderful topic. Well, I shouldn't say it's a wonderful topic, but definitely an interesting topic that all of us hear about every day, COVID-19, and we're going to get a little bit into breast cancer because October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And our guest today, who we haven't seen in a moment, and so we're very happy to have him back, is Dr. Thaddeus John Bell. Let me bring him in. Dr. Bell, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm so happy to be here again with you today, Marilyn. Thank you very much for offering me the invitation. And I want to remind you that, as people get older, that doesn't mean that they don't have something to offer. So anytime you want to call me, I guarantee you I will be available to help.
Very good. I actually totally agree with you on your sentiment and what you just said. Now, I do have to say this, Dr. Bell, that both of us, when we started this journey together way back, I believe in March, and we were learning about online broadcasts and everything, our lighting and our audio, it could have been going one way or the other. But I am so happy to see that both of us today have gotten our lighting together.
Yes, well, I have a technical support person, and he ordered me all of the things that I needed to have. I even got me a new computer, and so I'm good to go.
Oh, very good. Well, congratulations.
Yeah.
I got some new stuff myself. So as we learn, we grow, as you say. We're never too young to learn. We're never too old to learn something new. So
Absolutely.
Very good. Dr. Bell, thank you for joining us today. And of course, I brought you on so we could talk about COVID-19, what's happening now, what we need to know and understand. And let's start with today's news. So basically, it sounds like this current administration in Washington they've just basically given up. At a time when the numbers are rising. So, Dr. Bell, tell us what we need to know.
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize something that I emphasized when COVID first started, and that is we are watching and learning about a disease in real time. That's very, very important. Let me explain that. Most of the time when we are dealing with a disease or with a clinical issue, we already know about the disease or the clinical issue. We know what causes it. We know how to treat it. We know how to stop it. We already have vaccines prepared, and all we have to do is roll it out pretty much. Well, COVID has presented us with a different kind of problem because we knew absolutely nothing about the disease in the beginning. We had to literally depend upon what China told us and what our epidemiologist was able to get from the information that they gave us. So we are seeing a clinical problem that plays out in which we are, quote, flying by the seat of our pants, so to speak. What does that mean? That means that when people got sick and presented in the emergency room and went to ICU, the doctors in ICU didn't know whether or not ventilators would work, whether or not They had no idea of what kind of medications would work. They didn't know how to position the patient. We didn't even know how infectious the disease was. And so, with that in mind, and then if you remember, Marilyn, when the disease broke out, a lot of people who should have been admitted to the hospital did not get admitted and ended up dying at home. Now, the public is not aware of that, but a lot of people, if you remember, we were being overwhelmed so much that you would call in and you would get this virtual visit. And then, based on having a temperature and based on coughing and et cetera, they would tell you whether or not you needed to come to the emergency room. Well, and the pre-existing conditions that we knew about were minimum. We knew about smoking, we knew about diabetes, we knew about hypertension, and we knew about pulmonary problems. But we didn't know that if you had other pre-existing conditions, that made you subject to getting COVID very, very quickly. So over the past 8 months, we have learned quite a bit of information. And to make things worse, our leadership in government was poorly prepared and not scientifically based, and as a result, made very, very bad decisions and decided that they would consider our economic values more important than life itself. And that just contributed to the problem. So that's where we are right now. So since that time, we have learned quite a bit of information about COVID. And so we know that patients with pre-existing conditions, if you are exposed to it, you are likely to get it. One of the things that I want to, at the top, that I want to emphasize, at the beginning, we didn't know about masks, but now we know that wearing a mask is going to protect you from COVID-19. And we now know that social distancing is one of the things that's also going to protect us. And we know that washing our hands is going to protect us. However, as I mentioned, we have gotten more information, and now we know that if we are in crowds of people, we are likely to develop COVID because we know that the virus rides on droplets. And if people are in crowds, and if you are in that crowd for a certain period of time, you are likely to become infected with the disease, particularly if you're not wearing a mask, and particularly if you're not social distancing, and particularly if you have a pre-existing condition that has not been diagnosed or that has been diagnosed and you've not been taking care of it. So we know those kind of things. The other thing that we know is that vaccines, while they are on the horizon, they ain't gonna be ready by Christmas. So don't expect the government to be able to roll out a vaccine by Christmas. And even if they do roll it out, one of the things that you and I have already talked about that I don't think that the president or the government has a good appreciation for, and that is the lack of trust that African Americans have about vaccines in general, and vaccines plus this administration is just not going to work. So that's where we are. And the other thing is, there ain't no medicine that you can take, and vitamins don't work to keep you from getting COVID. Those are some of the kinds of things that our people need to understand.
Yes. Dr. Bell, you gave us a lot to start with. We got some comments and questions out there, and I'm going to back up to the beginning because I want to bring up with Dr. Anthony Fauci, and you mentioned this briefly. And at the beginning, Dr. Anthony Fauci actually did not recommend the wearing of masks, but this goes back to what you said. This is a novel coronavirus. And
Right,
novel is new. It
right,
means new. And I think a lot of people don't understand it. It means new. It means as you said, we are learning about this in real time. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the leading health expert in pandemics and coronavirus, is learning more about this in real time. So at the beginning, they just didn't know if masks were going to be effective. Once
right,
they gained more information through research and science, they changed and said, wear a mask. It will make a difference and it will save lives. And in the words of the great late Dr. Maya Angelou, when you know better, you do better. And it's that simple. There you go. And it's that simple that all of us can do our part by wearing face masks, washing our hands, and social distancing. That's the science and the medical part of it and the healthcare part of it. The political part of it is we have an administration because they threw out the pandemic playbook that was left to them, and they were not prepared, and they are more concerned about winning an election rather than doing what they should be doing, is taking care of the welfare of the American people. They are spreading a lot of misinformation and trying to discount the medical experts and the scientists. And people need to be aware of that. We need to have that discussion. And I know you, Dr. Bell, and other medical doctors never probably thought that you would be in a position where you would have to be political so you could do the work that you were trained to do. Provide the medical advice, the healthcare expertise to get us through this pandemic. And people really truly need to understand that there are actually two conversations going on. The conversation from the healthcare experts, the medical experts, the scientists, and then the political conversation, which is driven by misinformation. And it's very deliberate, and we need to be aware of that. But if you keep in mind, folks, that we are learning about this as we go, has nothing to do with the flu, nothing to do with the common cold. It is a novel coronavirus. It's
right,
new, and we're
right.
learning about it in real time. But we can help ourselves if we pay attention to folks like Dr. Bell. And Dr. Bell, I wrote my notes on here, and one of the things she said at the beginning, there were a lot of folks dying at home, and a lot of folks that were listed, not that they died from COVID, but from other causes.
That's right.
And they're using that politically now to discount the experts right
That's
now.
right.
And now, and we have to be discerning as a people. If you want to live, if you want to have Thanksgiving with your family, and that's not going to happen because Dr. Fauci has come out and said we can't have large gatherings because we're not doing what we need to do to end this. If you want to see your family, if you want to hug your grandparents, if you want to hug your grandchildren, we're going to have to do what the experts are telling us. Wear the face mask, wash our hands, use hand sanitizer, and we can get through this. Coronavirus does not have to control us. And you know what's also most important about that, Dr. Bell? This is not going to be the last coronavirus. This is not going to be the last pandemic because climate change, the environment, we have harmed it so much. The expectation is we're going to have this again. So if we don't get it right now, if we don't get our heads in the right place, I should say right now, we're going to repeat this mistake again and again and again.
One of the things you've said a mouthful. Let's go back to Dr. Fauci, and I want people to understand that Dr. Fauci is the guru of epidemiology and virology. In the African American community, we would say he is the man. He is the man. Not only is he a very talented scientist and physician, but his practice of medicine spans almost 50 years. Okay, there aren't very many people who are in epidemiology who did not know about Dr. Fauci. Those doctors who are experts themselves are, for lack of a better term, disciples of Dr. Fauci. He taught them what they know. The research that he has given to that body of knowledge is just unparalleled. So he is the man. Now, as he has pointed out, during his whole career, he has managed to stay non-political. Most doctors, I would say, like to stay non-political. Let me explain something to people. Physicians, we are taught to tell the truth whether we want to or not. For an example, if we make a diagnosis and the diagnosis is documented, that diagnosis, when 3 doctors look at it, is going to be, all 3 of those doctors should basically be saying the same thing, basically. Now, there may be some variations, but basically, we should be saying the same thing. It makes us feel very uncomfortable when we are forced to tell a lie, when the data suggests something else. That's why people may not have paid very much attention. But if you remember when the president's physician came out with all of these glowing terms about the president's physical health, we knew it was a lie because doctors don't talk like that. Doctors, I've never said, oh, you're going to live for another 200 years. Or, I've never seen anybody as healthy as you. That's not the kind of jargon that we use, that we learn how to use in medical school. So that's why the information, when most of us heard it, we had to kind of question that. Okay. So I can fully appreciate how Dr. Fauci must feel on a day-to-day basis, but he has been steadfast to what he knows is correct and what he believes, and he has not lost the respect of his colleagues. And Marilyn, I can tell you that's very, very important, to not lose the respect of your colleagues. So now, the other thing that I want to point out to you is that what you said about the coronavirus being a novel virus, you're absolutely right. There are 2 other viruses that have been similar to it, but this one is much more infectious than the other 2 that we have been aware of. This one is much, much more effective. With reference to politics, Marilyn, I tell people this is the first time in my medical career where you are actually going to be voting as though your life depended on it. I can truly say that you're going to be voting like your life depended on it. Because based on what we have seen thus far, this presidential administration does not appreciate science. Can you imagine, Maryland, in 2020, that the leader of the free world does not believe in science? I mean, how ridiculous can you get? And that's
Mhm.
why we have had over 225,000 people who will not be sitting at the table for Thanksgiving because this president made such bad decisions, all based on politics.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were in high school, and if you didn't believe in science, you got a failing grade. And we have an administration that is failing the United States citizens right now, even as we speak. You are correct. I never could imagine that our president would simply not only not believe in science, but actively fight against the advice of scientists.
Right.
That's what's happening now. We got some questions. Let's get to some questions because it kind of
Okay.
segues off of what we were just talking about. And this is from Ebony Hughes. Do you believe we can trust COVID stats currently?
I think that up to a point, I think that the COVID stats are not accurate in that they are worse than what's being reported. There is, in fact, I just read an article recently, and the argument is when someone dies and they have COVID and they have diabetes and they have heart disease, which one do you put on the death certificate as to the cause of death? Well, in the current administration, they are going to want to say, well, you shouldn't label that as COVID. You should label that he died from the complications of diabetes. So you can see where that would skew the data as it relates to COVID. The way we look at it now is that if a patient got admitted to the hospital, he had diabetes, but he got admitted to the hospital and he ended up going to ICU and getting put on a respirator because of COVID, the cause of death is going to be COVID. Diabetes is going to be secondary, but the primary cause of death, the thing that precipitated his demise, was the COVID. So you can see how already Trump is trying to say they want to kind of change those kind of things. The other thing that I want to make people aware of is that President Obama was very, very smart in that they left a playbook
Mm-hmm.
about a possible pandemic for the Trump administration to use. And Trump did not think it was worthwhile. So at the CDC, and I know this happened because I have friends that lost their jobs when Trump came in saying that he wanted to save money and he didn't want to continue paying these scientists at the CDC who was actually watching these kinds of things all over the world
Mm-hmm.
because the Obama administration had already told them that based on the data and based on the science, that we were going to be looking at a pandemic in the very, very near future. And they already had good experience working with Ebola and some of the other viruses, if you remember, that came up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the Zika virus and all of those other
Mm-hmm.
viruses. They
Mm-hmm.
already had a playbook as to how they would deal with those kinds of things. But it got caught up in politics, and the president, who doesn't know his A from a hole in the wall, decided that he would not pay attention.
I know we're kind of getting a little bit beyond COVID, but this ties into COVID because one thing that I have learned, whether it's economics, healthcare, education, social justice, all of these things are interconnected. And if you are not constantly working on a balance, I should say the environment is all interconnected. And if you are not constantly trying to balance these different subjects, then it gets skewed. And we're living in a time right now when we're in the middle of an imbalance in general. And a good example is, as you said, when Trump came in, he slashed these government agencies who they were tasked to prepare us for these type of situations. So he actually undermined the very infrastructures. Well, he was one more piece of that puzzle that undermined the very infrastructures that were supposed to protect us and prepare us. So when the pandemic did come, they were not prepared. I don't know I think they thought it was just going to be magic.
Well,
Magic is
not
going to
only
happen.
were they not prepared, but the team that had been assembled at the CDC had been disbanded.
Mm-hmm.
All of those scientists whose job was to monitor what was going on in the world. Keep in mind, our CDC was the go-to organization for issues like this. We were the leaders in the world regarding issues like this. And it was all because we had a CDC which was second to none. So when Trump came in, he decided that he would disband. In other words, he would cut the program out. He let all those scientists and all of those epidemiologists, he let all those people go. And so then we later found out, as a result of some conversations that he had with a reporter, that he actually knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, but did not have the wherewithal to appreciate what the Chinese government was telling him as to how lethal and how infectious this disease was going to be. He was being driven by the stock market and the economy, and he put that above everything. Now, one of the things I must tell you, Marilyn, one of the things that we found out in a very, very sad way, that the coronavirus took the lid off of health disparities.
Mm-hmm.
It took the lid off of health disparities. I must tell you, when I first heard about the coronavirus and heard what the scientists and the epidemiologists from China were saying about the people that it was affecting the most, keep in mind, this is what they said. It's affecting men who smoke. It's affecting people with diabetes. It's affecting people with heart disease. It's affecting people who were obese. It's affecting people with pulmonary disease. Now, Marilyn, it doesn't take a rocket science. I'm sitting here thinking, Black people got all of those things. Wow. We are getting ready to see something really, really bad, because all of these conditions Black people have. A lot of them know they have it, and a lot of them don't know they have it. But one of the things that I did not appreciate is that it was going to affect the essential workers and people in poverty, and that the social determinants of health was also going to play a major role in this pandemic. And then the racism,
Mm-hmm.
we didn't mention that, the racism that was already sitting out there with African Americans and the underserved not getting appropriate care. So you stack that on top of all of the other things, and I think, Maryland, when it's all over with, we are going to see that the pandemic has taken a major toll on African Americans, the underserved, and other people of color.
I agree with you, Dr. Bell, and I agree with you not only is it going to be a major toll? COVID, as you say, the racism, the policies, the lack of action towards addressing those disparities in healthcare. I'll give you a personal example. My father died of lung cancer. We've been in the last year dealing with his lung cancer. And I tell people, he died of lung cancer, but COVID killed him. And what I mean by that is he was going under radiation treatments this time last year for lung cancer, and they were able to shrink the tumor that was in his lungs. And then from that point, he was to go back every 3 months for his checkup so we could stay ahead of the lung cancer returning. And my dad was a smoker for 72 years. So we're blessed to have had him for 89 years, okay? Because for him to smoke for 72 years, it's a miracle.
Yes.
Yeah, totally unknown. And then what happened was COVID hit. And I'll tell anyone, what happened was once COVID hit, his world started shrinking. Because every day he would get up and he would go to the senior center. He had his social outlet. He was still able to, he wasn't driving, but we would take him and he would go in town and visit, walk up and down Front Street in Georgetown. And he was a veteran and people would greet him. Hey, Mr. Pete, thank you for your service. And he loved that. That was his outlet. And when COVID hit, he didn't get COVID, but his mental health suffered. And when his mental health suffered, it opened him up physically to that cancer to come back with a vengeance. And it did. In the last 3 months, basically June, July, August, late May, June, July, August, I saw the deterioration. He went down quickly. And a part of it, I really believe, was depression, the lack of him just being with people on a regular basis. He was talking to people on the phone, but every day I could see that world got smaller, 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 because he couldn't be out there with people. And I cannot help but think that if we had just shut down this country the way it should have been shut down, because people don't realize we never shut down. We never shut down this country, not the way other countries shut down. But if we had just shut down for maybe 5 to 6 weeks so that we could have really returned back to somewhat of a normal where people were really out there, that my father would have had a little bit more time. Because our mental health is just as important as our physical health.
Absolutely.
It's interconnected. And if you don't have good mental health, it's going to open you up to a lot of physical stuff. And I don't think the study has been done yet, but I am sure someone much smarter than me is going to say, we're going to have to research the impact of COVID on our mental health and the results of that. And my father will never be listed as someone who died from COVID, because he didn't. He died from cancer, but it was the COVID that killed him, because we couldn't reopen this country the way it should have been reopened. And then you talk about that disproportionately impacts Black people, because we already have PTSD. We already have mental health issues that we are not dealing with the way we should be dealing with them. So I suffice it to say that in the future, the research is going to show that this impacted us not only physical, not only through disproportionate health care, not only through high death rates, but mentally it impacted the African American community also.
Well, Marilyn, I appreciate you telling us that story. I know how painful that must have been for you, but it's already being well documented that our mental health is being significantly impacted by COVID. As a practicing physician, I can tell you that when I started doing the telehealth during the time when COVID started, it was the mental stuff that I dealt with more than the physical stuff, particularly when it came to elderly people, people who lived alone. You know, loneliness was already a part of the health environment of the country, particularly among African Americans and the underserved, and particularly among uh, people who had recently lost a spouse. Loneliness went to another level. So it was not unusual for me to call patients and to ask, well, how are you doing? And then you would hear all of this, all of these signs, all of these symptoms come out talking about loneliness. And so that's why I would encourage those who are under the sound of my voice now that if you have an older person in your life, um, call them up, um, FaceTime them, uh, let them know that you are thinking about them. Just yesterday, case in point, I talked to a friend of mine who's 92 years old, and he was so happy. I call him on a regular basis. He was just so happy. I couldn't get him off the phone. We talked for about an hour, and so so you know you'll find out that um, the mental aspect of
Mhm.
what COVID is going to do, as you pointed out, is going to affect us significantly. And you know, it doesn't mean that they need to be put on a medication. It means we are a social people.
Mhm. Mhm.
We are a social people. And if you take that away from us, that's major. And as a result, our physical health will begin to decline. By the way, along that line, I want to let you know, I don't know whether you're aware of it or not, but I did a thing with Bruce Bruce. Are you familiar with Bruce Bruce?
Mm-mm.
Bruce Bruce is a comedian, and if you go to Laughter of Medicine with Dr. Thaddeus Bell and Bruce Bruce, he's a comedian. I went to Atlanta and we did a thing on Laughter of Medicine, and it is really really funny. So you gotta go and check it out. You'll laugh yourself off. You'll laugh yourself off.
Well,
But
we're
that's
gonna
a
check
very
that out
very
and
important
make
point.
sure other people do too,
Yeah,
Dr. Bell.
yeah.
Um, all
So
right.
that's so you know one of the other things that you mentioned that I definitely want to talk a little bit about. Um, it's going to be difficult uh, with the holidays coming up because we're going to have to do something different that we are not accustomed to. We are accustomed to getting together and socializing with family and friends. We're not going to be able to do that this year. We are going to have to practice social distancing. I would encourage you to already start thinking about who you are going to spend your time with during the holidays. I would not encourage you to spend time uh, with a whole lot of family members and you are not aware of what kind of things they have been doing to protect themselves from the coronavirus. You're not going to be able to do that. So you, you're going to have to only spend time with people who are always in your immediate environment. And if you are around other people, you're going to have to wear a mask. And if you're around other people and you're not sure about their health status, it's not going to be healthy to be around them for any more than 10 or 15 minutes. You're going to have to socially distance yourself from these folk because this virus we know rides on droplets and it is very infectious. And Marilyn, I can tell you the patients that I have lost from COVID, they all got COVID from a family member. They were older and a younger person came into their environment and gave them COVID. So we know that COVID is passed to older people with pre-existing conditions, because remember, if you have COVID, you can oftentimes be asymptomatic, which means that you don't have symptoms. And so you can give it to other people. So, I think I was telling you, Marilyn, I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I just completed a month of radiation for my prostate cancer. Is weak because I'm 76 years old and I have this pre-existing condition. So I have to take extra precautionary measures to not expose myself to people who I think to do all of the right things that I know to do. And so I will not be visiting a whole lot of people during this Thanksgiving holidays. And I only will be around people who are already in my environment most of the time. And I think that other people are going to have to learn to do that. And if you have a parent, then you're going to have to think ahead for them. God forbid that you find out that you gave COVID to your mama, or to your daddy, or to your auntie, or to somebody that you love. So you're just going to have to think like that. You're going to have to think differently during this holiday season.
We have to be unselfish. That's going to come down to it, and think beyond our immediate wants, and think about if we want to see mama, daddy, grandma, granddaddy next Thanksgiving, we have to take action this Thanksgiving.
That's right.
And that action is going to we got to love each other from a distance.
That's right.
And the good thing is, y'all, we got the technology to do it. We can have Thanksgiving by Zoom. I really truly believe, as human beings, we have the creativity and the brain power to figure this out. We just have to kind of get over ourselves when it comes to instant gratification. And if we just had done the right thing 8 months ago, we would have been having Thanksgiving. But we didn't. That's the reality, folks, that we did not. So now, so we can have Thanksgiving in 2021, maybe, hopefully, we need to do the right thing now. And before we get to Thanksgiving, Dr. Bell, we want to talk about, first, let me remind everybody that you are watching A Gathering Place hosted by the Gullah Geechee Chamber of Commerce. I got to do my little station break. But let's talk about voting, because that's the next big thing coming up. And we want to talk about safety when it comes to voting, because that's what's happening even as we speak right now. And we do have, Ebony mentioned, curbside voting in certain states have been banned days ago as a form of voting amid COVID. It's a safety risk for the disabled. These midstream changes create risk. I haven't heard about that, Ebony, but it's good for, I know Ebony, she's very involved politically, so I'm going to take her word for it that in some places curbside voting may have been banned. I have actually volunteered and taken 2 voters to vote, and they happen to be by curbside. So here where I live in Georgetown, they are taking some pretty good precautions, not only with the face mask, but the face shield. I have one. When I go pick people up, I use the face shield and a mask and a hand sanitizer and Lysol in the car. I sanitize when people leave, because we're taking those cautions. But Dr. Bell, what else can we do to keep ourselves safe so we can practice our right to vote?
Well, you're absolutely right. When I watched that on television, I said, "Oh my God, look at all these people standing in line." And then I started thinking about the health conditions that they probably have. Number one, if you have a health condition and your doctor has told you that you are very susceptible to getting COVID, and I think you should confer with your doctor, then I think you need to pay attention to his recommendation. And I think you need to vote by mail-in or whatever way that's legal in which your vote will count. I'm hoping that you have already done that. I want to also make sure that if you have a pre-existing condition, you need to make sure that your pre-existing condition is under good control. Because if it's not under good control and you go out there and stand up for 2 or 3 hours, which you may not be able to do, it could not be a good scene. I saw an interesting video the other day where a lady she had arthritis of her knees, and so she went and bought I don't expect people to do this, but she went and bought one of those chairs, and the chair had a little compartment on the side where she had all of her food and her water and everything. And she even said she had already gone and checked the place out, so if she had to go to the bathroom, she knew where the bathroom was at the voting place. So, those kind of things may not sound important, but you definitely will need to make those kind of preparations before you go down there to vote. So here again, as Marilyn has pointed out, you want to wear your mask. You want to practice you want to practice social distancing, and you just want to use some common sense. If you know that you're going to go out there and you may have to stand out there for 8 hours, and you're not capable of standing up 8 hours or 4 hours, if that matter, then you may want to make some other arrangements, for to make sure that you're going to be able to vote. So I would definitely encourage people, to take those things under consideration.
And who would have ever thought that we would have had to make a voting plan, as Ebony so rightly said, that to actually just vote, that you might have to check off, I need a chair, I need some snacks, I need my face mask. But
Yeah.
that's what we have to do, folks. And that's it's in the big picture, that's a minor inconvenience for what our ancestors had to do to get the right to vote. So
That's right.
yeah.
You don't want to be out there. You don't want to be out there and you're a diabetic and you haven't eaten since this morning, and now your blood sugar is dropping low, and you begin to feel bad, and you trying to vote. Those kind of things that you're just going to have to think about before you go down there. So I think this is a very, very important point. Now, Marilyn, all those people standing out there, they are not in perfect health.
No, they're not.
They're gonna have some medical issues. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is I want to make people aware of is that young people have medical issues too. There's this young people have this aura about them that they can't get sick. Well, the data shows that if young people get sick and get COVID and end up going to ICU, their chances of dying is significant if they end up in ICU and have to be put on a respirator. We don't know why that's the case, because as I said, that's something about COVID that we are still learning about. So, young people don't get a pass with this virus. In the beginning, Marilyn, they thought that it was a disease that affected people in nursing homes. What they have found out is that if people in nursing homes are not exposed to COVID by young people who give it to them, the nursing home patients would be all right.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I was we forget that at the beginning of this COVID, just stuck with me, this situation. There was a 21-year-old soccer coach in Italy who died of COVID. they had no idea that he had leukemia because he wasn't displaying any symptoms or anything of leukemia. But he got the COVID, but because he had an underlying condition of leukemia at the age of 21, he was dead within a week. And I remember that story, and it really struck me because you're right. They're emphasized, that's why they were pushing schools to reopen, or young people don't get it, or if they get it, they're going to survive. From the very beginning, young people have been dying from COVID. We've just been glossing over it.
Speaking of that, people with sickle cell anemia are very highly susceptible to getting COVID. And I would even venture to say that some, not all, some people with sickle cell trait, because there are some people with sickle cell trait, even though they have the trait, clinically they have the disease. They act like patients who have the disease. So, if you are aware of that history in yourself, you may want to talk to your doctor, and you may want to make arrangements to vote another way and not expose yourself
Mm-hmm.
to that kind of situation.
That's a very good point, Dr. Bell. I didn't even think about that, but that actually is a very good point to make. In this, so there are probably a lot of folks out there who have not thought about that. So thank you for bringing it up, Dr. Bell. Our time is running short, and I know you wanted to talk about breast cancer awareness because October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So we're going to wrap up our show today with talking about that because you have some news updates, especially regarding African American women. So if you could share with us, what do we need to know about breast cancer awareness?
The news that I want to share with the audience is that young women can have breast cancer too. So if you are a young woman, young, 21, 22, 23 years of age, and you find a mass in your breast, you want to make sure that that mass is worked up appropriately. When I say worked up, you will need to have, in most cases, a mammogram, and you will need to have a biopsy. Don't let the doctor tell you that, oh, it's just a fibroid and there's nothing for you to worry about. No, that is not acceptable in 2020. So you will need to get a mammogram and you will need to get a biopsy to find out what that lesion is. Because young people die, young Black women die of breast cancer, just like older Black women. And so keep in mind that the reason that Black women in general die is because they come to diagnosis late and they don't complete the treatment as prescribed. So that's the point that I want to make for young African American women.
We have a situation, Dr. Bell, in Georgetown where they have moved the maternity ward to another section of the county. And Ebony I'm going to post what she says about it. According to Tylen's Hospital, they moved the maternity ward because of COVID budget crunches, and they moved it away from the group of people that face the most health disparities. Infant mortality and childbirth deaths are the highest among Black women. And I wanted to bring that on because you gave me such a wonderful segue regarding Black women and breast cancer. And it's true that in Tylen's Health, which is Georgetown, moved the maternity ward, and not only did it cause more problems because of transportation issues, now if you live on the western portion of the county, you have further to travel if you're in labor. Then they moved that maternity ward now. If you're a pregnant African American woman and we have those high infant mortality rates and high maternal mortality rates, now you got to travel further to go to your OBGYN or the maternity ward. It added on probably at least 20 to 30 minutes to your drive on top of wherever you're coming from. It could be It could be 45 minutes just to get to Georgetown. Now they've added time on to that. And that's an issue that local social justice organizations are working on, because that's real. That's a real decision that's a decision that made real impact on a group of women who already face some disparities because of lack of access.
Yeah, one of the final points is that women in general who live in rural area have a higher prevalence of health disparities than women who live in the city, for that very reason that you pointed out, because the lack of access to care, because they can't get to a health center in a reasonable amount of time. And so therefore it creates issues. So you're absolutely right. I want to let you know how much I appreciate you asking me, Marilyn, to be with you today. It's been my pleasure.
I know it was a little bit longer than I expected today, but it was a good conversation. We had some good questions and comments coming through, Dr. Bell. So this has been wonderful. You know I'm going to invite you back, right?
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Very good. Dr. Bell, thank you for joining us today. I'm going to let you go, but I'll definitely be in touch. Thank you for the conversation and giving us good information, not only about COVID-19, but about breast cancer, so we could really make some informed decisions as we move forward. Voting, Thanksgiving, and beyond that. Thank you, Dr. Bell, and I will see you later. All right, have a good evening.
All right.
And everyone, I want to remind you that every Wednesday and Sunday at 4 o'clock, we host a gathering place brought to you by the Gallagher Chamber of Commerce. We had a wonderful conversation today with Dr. Thaddeus John Bell, founder of the Closing the Gap in Healthcare. And next time we bring him back, I'm going to make sure that we'll have some videos with him and Bruce, the comedian, to share with you. So we have our next show is Wednesday at 4 o'clock. Please join us. I would tell you what the topic is, but right now I can't remember what it is, but I do have someone coming on. And then, and then on November 4th, we're going to have Amy Kelly with the International Gala Film Festival. She's going to be talking about the upcoming Gala Film Festival online and in person at Brook Green Gardens. We're going to be celebrating the Gala and African diaspora through film. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you, Dr. Bell, for spending some time with us and sharing the information that we need regarding COVID. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your weekend and good night.